the microphones on?
Morning.
Yes? You can hear? No, Russell can't hear us. Move to the front.
Oh, Keith, you're funny.
Okay, we might get started. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming along to tonight's meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we are gathered here today, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Item 1 on the agenda is the membership. The membership is as listed, and I'd like to welcome back Councillor Amir.
Yeah.
Item 2, apologies. There are apologies from Councillor Lawrence, who is on an approved leave of absence. Item 3, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Are there any disclosures? No disclosures, thank you. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes of council meeting held on the 2nd of October 2017.
Happy to move.
Councillor Messina moved and seconded by Councillor Rennie. All those in favour?
I'm abstaining because I was absent.
Okay. And against? And abstained. That motion carried. Thank you. Item 5, question and submission time. There have been a number of questions submitted online, so we'll go to those first. The first question is from Anne Laver from Northcote, who isn't attending this evening, so I'll read out her question. Further to my question on the 7th of August 2017 concerning the Reservoir Waste Management and Recycling Centre, and further to item 8.4 Waste and Litter Strategy Action Plan tabled on October the 2nd, 2017. The Mayor advised me on the 7th of August in response to my question as to when the Resource Centre is to be upgraded due to its poor condition that $200,000 is spent on the centre. In light of the new Waste and Litter Strategy Plan to now include food waste in our recycling, I ask Darebin Council how, without an injection of more funds, is the Reservoir Waste Management and Recycling Centre going to be able to cope with additional recycling requirements? $200,000 out of the total cost of some $15 million spent on collecting rubbish is, in my opinion, disproportionate. The centre is badly in need of an upgrade. Many items which are supposed to be recycled are being put into landfill because the centre is unfunded and poorly managed. I'll read out the response to that. It is long, so please bear with me. The Darebin Resource Recovery Centre is separate to Council's curbside recycling, garbage and green waste collections. The curbside collections are Council's core waste services provided to every household, and accordingly most of the waste expenditure is used on these services. The food waste collection will be undertaken by Council and processed by Veolia at a purpose-built composting facility. The Resource Centre will also continue to recycle any green waste received at that centre. The Resource Centre currently also recycles scrap metal, commingled recyclables, computers, monitors, TVs, printers, keyboards and computer mice, paint and household batteries, fluorescent tubes and compact fluorescent lights, small gas cylinders, mattresses and furniture and goods that can be resold at the shop. Council and the operators of the Resource Centre meet regularly to discuss the needs of the centre to maximise recycling rates. An officer would be happy to discuss with you further regarding what specific items you would like to be recycled by the centre. There's a second question. I note the Darebin Council replied to my request to extend the retention of audio recordings of the Darebin Council meetings longer than 3 months, and whilst I appreciate that 3 months meets the formal requirements of the Public Records Act 1973, I would like to request that Council reconsider. It is actually in the Council interest to retain the recordings for longer for legal protection in the advent of action being brought against Council. The recordings are not expensive to retain and would aid the community and provide greater transparency in governance. Council is currently going through an open public tender process to upgrade the audio-visual system of the Council chambers and the conference room next door. As part of this process, we're exploring the option of maintaining the current process of live streaming of Council meetings with the additional option of utilising social media, so for example, live streaming on Facebook of the Council meetings. If this is considered a viable option, then it will allow Council to save the streaming onto YouTube and then it will be retained indefinitely. But because it is going through the tender process, there's no definitive answer currently. But the tender process should be done by Christmas, is what I've been told. The next question is from Andrew Barrett. Is Andrew Barrett here? No? The first question, tree planting. In the annual report 2016-17, the number of trees planted by the City of Darebin was quoted as 2,000 trees. This a laudable achievement, but I am pleased to be advised of the number of trees removed and the reason for their removal over the same period. So the response is that approximately 300 trees were removed as part of Council's planting and removal program in 2016-17. Tree removal will only be considered if no other remedial treatments are suitable. Trees are sometimes removed due to decline in their health, structural safety concerns or major infrastructure issues. And the second question from Mr Barrett is a two-part question. And the first part of that question is parking waivers issued to developers. Could the council please advise on the typical charge to developers of each waiver being granted? The council does not currently collect a financial contribution for the waiver of car parking spaces. And then the second part of that question is that I note that Darebin Council's mission statement is to preserve and improve the physical, social, environmental, cultural and economic health of all neighbourhoods and ensure the quality of life for current and future generations. How can this be achieved if parking waivers continue and trees are cut down and high density developments continue unabated? That's a big question. So I guess in relation to the parking waivers are entitled through a combination of case law that's allowable under the relevant clause in the planning scheme, which is available through discretion through the state planning provisions. I guess in terms of the other parts of that question around the high density of developments, the council has its municipal strategic statement which guides land use planning in the city, and what we've done through that process of developing the strategic statement is to identify the areas where density is appropriate in terms of access to vital infrastructure and services, and so that's where we focus the higher density developments in the city while we continue to preserve and maintain the neighbourhoods, and I guess that's the goal that we're trying to achieve. Just me talking at the moment. The next question is from Leslie Walker, who isn't with us, so I'll read her question. Maybe we should change the local law so someone else can read the question. The Darebin Climate Emergency Plan, August 2017, states that Council is working with Melbourne Water and the local community to reduce flood risk in Darebin. Victoria's Climate Change Act 2010 obliges Melbourne Water to have regard to the potential impacts of climate change when declaring a flood level under the Water Act 1989. In demonstrating a commitment to mitigating climate change impacts, has Darebin Council's Planning Department ever attempted to satisfy itself by seeking objective evidence that Melbourne Water has considered the impact of climate change when it declares a flood level for a Darebin property? So Melbourne Water has two overlays in the Darebin planning scheme, the special building overlay and the land subject to inundation overlay that deal with flooding from Melbourne Water main drains and creeks respectively. Both of these overlays present flood levels based on a probability as defined via Australian Rainfall and Runoff, a national guideline document which is used for the estimation of design flood characteristics in Australia. The version of the Australian Rainfall and Runoff Manual, which was current when Melbourne Water last updated their flood overlays, did not include allowance for climate change. Council engineers will continue discussions with Melbourne Water and other agencies to ensure climate change is considered in future flood modelling. And that's all the questions that we received via the online form. Are there any further questions from the gallery this evening? No? Great. Okay, moving now on to item 6, petitions. Are there any petitions? No petitions. Item 7, urgent business. There is one item of urgent business.
That's correct.
Pop it up on the screen.
I'll move that the item of urgent business, once it's available on screen, is accepted.
Is accepted onto the agenda, yep.
I'm happy to second.
So that's seconded by Councillor Rennie. So this is to accept this item onto the agenda. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Would you now like to move that motion?
I'd now like to move the item.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for accepting this item onto the agenda. I realise that the type is small and there's a lot of words up there. This is circulated quite late, given the both the urgency of this item becoming a matter over the weekend. It relates to a site known as the Stonemasons site on the corner of Cunningham Street and Rucker Street in Northcote. It's an important site in Darebin's history and, of course, in Melbourne's history as well, as it is one of the sites that is considered most likely to be the point of exchange and contact between John Batman and the Wurundjeri tribal elders. And one of the reasons why this site, of course, is important is because there are very few sites which have been identified as a possibility. Another one is Dights Falls, but this is one of the most important ones and most likely, according to historians. This site has been in private ownership for over 100 years and has just been recently put on the market, and over the weekend the sold sticker arrived on the real estate board. There's been a lot of community interest in this site and, of course, also developer interest. The community interest stems obviously from the possibility of seeing this site returned in some form to public use, whether that be parkland or some sort of cultural heritage, obviously reflecting the Wurundjeri history. The opportunity to revegetate and rehabilitate the section of the Merri Creek, which is a prominent part of the Merri Creek in this corridor, is also part of this. There are several important restrictions on this site, and they are noted in the motion that councillors can see. But this motion seeks to go a step further and to signal clearly to both our community, to the state government, to the real estate agent handling the property, to the current owner and the prospective future owner, what council seeks to see at this site. And it outlines council's desire as a matter of urgency for the state government to step in to undertake the cultural heritage management work that should have been undertaken a long time ago in relation to this site, and based on that assessment determine a course of action which could include the state purchasing either part or all of the site, therefore returning it to public hands, which many in the community believe it should have always been. There are, as I said, a number of restrictions on the site. It is a site that may have issues in terms of its development potential. We can't speculate on that. We would become the responsible authority if there was an application. But before a permit is lodged, before anything further in the space occurs, our community is calling upon us and has called upon us and has called upon other political decision makers at both the state and federal level as well to take urgent action to see that this site is protected wherever possible, and that the cultural and Aboriginal heritage elements and environmental heritage and future potential rehabilitation of the site are taken as seriously as they possibly can under the law. So that's the course of action that I'm proposing this evening, is to make it very clear to all stakeholders what the restrictions are, but to go a step further and to call on the state government for their urgent assistance to assess the cultural heritage of this site, and of course to take whatever action is required to validate that cultural heritage and of course the history of the Wurundjeri people at this location.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, I hope that this motion might actually enable the owner of the land to come and have an earlier conversation with council than they might otherwise plan to have. And I think that would be a really good outcome if what this motion does is actually mean that we are sitting down with the owner, whether the existing owner or the future owner, and able to have a discussion, which so rarely happens, unfortunately, in planning. We get the plans and it's too late by that stage. So wouldn't it be great if before there was any concept of plans, any idea of what occurred with this site, there was a conversation, and I think this is the beginning of that process.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? The motion's carried. Moving now, there's no further urgent business. Moving now to item 8, consideration of reports. 8.1, Annual Report 2016-17. Moved by Councillor Messina. And a seconder? Anybody? Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor. What we have in front of us is the City of Darebin Annual Report 2016 to 2017. Firstly, thank you to the team of officers that have diligently worked many, many hours and weeks, I'm sure, to submit the annual report for the 2016-17 financial year. Under the Local Government Act of 1989, all Victorian councils must prepare an annual report It's a statutory requirement. The annual report is a report for Council's progress against goals, actions and key performance indicators that are measured against the Council Plan of 2013 to 2017 financial periods. It reviews our strategic and operational and financial performance. It's structured under the local government framework, under the Charter of Good Governance. Now, I'm not going to look at the return on equity or debt service ratios or any financial ratio analysis, but I will focus on the results. The results showed us that we exceeded all targets and expectations set by the Council plans, but I'd like to highlight a few. Council launched Darebin's first tourism strategy. Council introduced the Darebin City child-friendly strategy. 143 business upgraded to LED lights. Our award-winning Solar Savers program saw 184 solar systems installed in pensioners and social housing. We constructed 390 metres of new bike lanes and planted 2,000 trees. I wish to highlight the advocacy roles we've undertaken at the Council: increasing quality affordable housing, reducing harm from gambling, the future of the Preston Market, workable solutions of the St George's Road medium street, eliminating single-use plastic items. There are only a few, but I've only got 3 minutes. The annual report fulfils the requirements, finally, of the Local Government Act 1989, and the Council officers will now commission a graphic design artist to produce a publication for distribution for our municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Amir. And you don't have to stand.
Maybe I'll
Thanks.
So this is the annual report for 2016-17, so the final annual report for the last council plan, covering the end of the last council term into this one. It's really great to see such positive results in terms of the projects undertaken and some of the reporting back from our community. So a couple of things that stood out for me was new large projects such as the East Preston Community Centre, which was determined by a citizens jury back in 2013-14. Also good results around gender equity within the organisation, something I was really proud to see, that we don't see that mismatch between the number of men and women in senior roles, and also for all those people who complain that council should be focused on roads, rates and rubbish. The rubbish collection rates are excellent. The satisfaction is outstanding. And in terms of how rates are spent, it's really great, I think, that council, ours and others, has so much transparency that any member of the community in Darebin can have a look and see in really quite a high level of detail how the money is spent, what our targets are, whether those targets were met. If they weren't met, then that's something that we can and should be held accountable to, and that's something that people don't necessarily have the ability to do for a state or federal budget. Often the line items are so high, and the KPIs are hidden in a report that just stays in government departments. So to be able to have that laid out for the community and for us to be held accountable and hold ourselves accountable is really great going forward. Of course, the next annual report we'll see will be reporting on the new council plan that we launched a couple of months ago here. So I'm really excited to see that what we can do next, starting from such a strong base.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Rennie.
Yes, I think this report is significant in that, in fact, it is the report on the last year of the previous 4-year council plan. And so in that way, I think we can say we've had some influence, but in fact, I think it's worth acknowledging the previous council, because this is the report that delivered on their plan, and also acknowledging particularly the work of all the staff in the organisation who actually managed to achieve these deliverables. It's a lot of work writing the plan, but it's even more work actually delivering all of the things that have happened. And what we see in this report is that those services have been delivered to an outstanding level. So this is in many ways, a report that we're signing off on, but in fact it heralds the sort of change to a new 4-year council plan. I think we've already seen some of those shifts begin, and I think this actually gives us a really solid base to work from.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Greco.
Yes, I'd like to say a few words in relation to this report. I think it's worth to note that when you look at the annual report, you see the varied number of activities and services that the council provides. And why I say that, because just recently, councils have been criticised for engaging in advocacy type activity and ignoring what they call the 3 R's of council. I believe councils could do both, and actually our council, we could do both quite well. If you look at the financial data in this report, we're in an excellent state in relation to the future projects that we have before us, and also it puts us also in a strong position in relation to advocating for some of the broader issues that interface, if you like, with council, and that we should not shy away from, and whilst at the same time ensuring that we do deliver those basic and core services to council, as this report points out. So congratulations to the staff, because they're the ones that actually make sure that our policies and our ideas actually get implemented, and for delivering such positive results.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Councillor Amir beat me to the punch on the roads, rates and rubbish line, because one of the things that holds true, and I think it holds true here in Darebin as much as any council, is that the majority of the things that this organisation and its wonderful staff, all 1,300 or so of them do, is a whole lot of things that actually often go unnoticed, but which are absolutely essential to everyday life. And they're the things, the little things that actually make a big difference to the health and well-being of our community. So, for instance, when a vulnerable family who has statistically a very low likelihood of making their first maternal child health appointment gets a phone call, or gets an extra second phone call, the third phone call, or even support to actually get to an appointment, that means that we get a figure, and we get the sort of figures that we have in this report here, which say that we are doing and going above and beyond, trying to meet not just the bin requirements, which are the things that people tend to think about local government, but also the long-term educational and health outcomes, some of which sit in our purview and others sit beyond our purview, but we take responsibility because it's our community. I just wanted to mention a couple of the items where we actually failed miserably because we overshot the target. We exceeded the target excessively, and I think we need to acknowledge we've gone a little bit too hard on some things, and we need to calm down. So one of the items which I was surprised by actually was the number of street art projects completed, a target of up to 10, and we came in with the result of 18. Excessive number of street art projects, way too much tagged sites that we're actually taking action on. But of course we've gone, and what have we gone and done, and set another target this year for 10 more street art murals this year to combat tagged sites. So terrible outcome there, of course, and we should all feel very guilty. The last one I want to mention, though, is something which hasn't been mentioned, which is the adoption of the Child Friendly Cities framework. And for me, that is a really significant part of the last council term. And Councillor Williams and I both had involvement in that, and it's so great to see how that's going to start to impact in this council term.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Can I put that to the vote? All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 8.2, Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021.
Happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Williams.
Council is required to develop a new domestic animal management plan, which is done every 4 years. In accordance to the section of 68A of the Domestic Animals Act of 1994, the Darebin's current animal management plan was developed in 2013 and will expire in November 2017 this year. The plan continues to build on substantial work that's been undertaken by Council since 2013, and while it will actually commence its review of the existing plan. The whole point of having a new plan that we revise every 4 years is to ensure that we keep on top of it. So the purpose of the plan is to provide a strategic framework, and for the next 4 years that it delivers policy directions and the actions plan for the management of the domestic cats and animals throughout the municipality. The key issues and challenges that need to be identified in the new plan were things like the difference between dog and cat owners, and the behaviours and approaches that they need to be adopted. You'll always get a different perception on a person if you have a cat owner or a dog owner. The higher the number of unwanted, unclaimed cats requiring new homes, contributing to the overwhelming of cancels, pound and rescue groups. So it seems to be growing and increasing with the amount of rescues that we're occurring on a weekly basis. Maximising the numbers of cats and dogs registration to ensure that those animals are rehomed as soon as possible or go back to the original owners.
identifying better ways for residents and rescue organisations to work together. To also increase desexing rates and unwanted cats and kittens. To look at things like reducing the incidence of cats and dogs nuisance and number of dog attacks, and increase education to residents. New after-hours service model, which will be used to incorporate with council in Reservoir we have a holding facility place, so we'll hold them there overnight until they're being transported to the pound. On a financial and resource implications, the Animal Management Service for 2017 and 2020 and 2018 has been budgeted an income of $896,022 from the registrations and infringements, and the expenditure of $1,250,765. The net cost of the council is $354,743. So that's what my recommendation is, that we, it's pretty straightforward, that we vote on that we can look forward to our next plan that we're working towards.
Thank you, Councillor.
On another note, I went to the tour today for the animal shelter, which opened today, and it was absolutely beautiful. So if any of you have not been there, I urge you to go out there.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, and I second Councillor Williams' comments about the new shelter. And in fact, I was speaking with a resident in Whittlesea who is very proud to be part of it, and I said, do you realise that the animal shelter is the most humane animal shelter, as I understand it, in all of Victoria and probably Australia, and it's not necessarily something that everyone knows, but in fact the framing of this project initially here in this chamber was to have ideally a no-kill shelter, and a shelter that responded to our previous animal management plan, which remains, I understand, one of the most progressive in the country in relation to better outcomes for animals. I just wanted to share something with you. As I was walking in this evening, I happened to run into 3 council officers. One was standing guarding a box, and it was not a box, in fact, it had a towel over the top of it. And I said, oh, have you got a cat in there? And this particular council officer said yes, and I thought this was a bit curious. I didn't realise we were going to have animals in the chamber tonight, but maybe as part of the animal management plan we might do a demonstration. And another council officer came along and she said, oh, thanks for minding for me. And I said, what's going on here? And a particular council officer said, oh, I'm taking him home. He's getting picked up by a rescue person tomorrow. And I thought, isn't that interesting that this is a strategy we as an organisation are adopting tonight after consultation, but it's actually council officers who are doing their bit. It's members in our community over a number of years now who are doing their bit, and it's a whole of community response which we've galvanised here in the last few years and which continues and is fixated in very clear form in this plan. But to hear council officers taking a cat home because it has to go somewhere so that it gets to go somewhere nice in a couple of days' time is a fantastic thing. I just wanted to draw to councillors' attention on page 6 of the actual plan, a lovely and startling and challenging map, of course, which is Darebin cats, what you need to know. And I think this is actually the population study, the first ever population study of cats. And I won't draw anyone's attention to the fact that in fact there was a cat that ran for the mayor of Mexico in 2013. And could this be considered in Darebin in the future? I think.
Councillor McCarthy, you're out of time.
I'm out of time.
Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the... Oh, no, that wasn't it. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? The motion's carried. Item 8.3, proposed discontinuance and sale of road adjoining 800 Plenty Road Reservoir.
Happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Williams and second by Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
This report provides the history and the background relating to the right-of-way adjoining 800 Plenty Road Reservoir. That council commences the statutory process under the section 206 clause 3 of the Schedule 10 to the Local Government Act of 1989. The discontinuance of the road is 3 to 13 Tracy Street and 54 to 56 Elliott Street. Oh, is that right? Should be 800 Plenty Road. Does that go to the back of it?
Yeah, that was fine.
No, I apologise. So this is only 800 Plenty Road Reservoir. So we're to give notice under the sections 207A and 82A and 223 Act of the proposed discontinuance, and the intention to sell the appropriate appropriate land, and we give notice in the newspaper and the gazettes and the council's website. And such notice state to the discontinuance that council process to sell the private treaty and the land from the discontinuance road to the adjoining property of 800 Plenty Road of Aldi Foods Proprietary Limited.
So just to be clear, the recommendation in the report is actually incorrect,
It's meant to be 800.
and that Councillor Williams is moving the recommendation with to discontinue the road adjoining 800 Plenty Road Reservoir.
Yep.
Yep, we're clear on that?
Yep.
Good, thank you. Councillor Mead, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, so this is a part of a road that was previously serving a group of shops at Summerhill Shopping Centre in South Reservoir. It's been fenced off because of vandalism and dumping of rubbish. Aldi Supermarket is interested in purchasing this piece of land, and it's not required for access or drainage at the moment, so I support the proposal to start the conversation about the sale of the land.
Thank you. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? The motion's carried. The next item is 8.4, Needs Analysis, Darebin Intercultural Centre. Moved by Councillor Greco and seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Just first of all, I'd like to thank the officers for preparing such an extensive report, which gives us some sort of understanding and better background in relation to what's happening with the Intercultural Centre. And just briefly, the Intercultural Centre came in existence in the last perhaps 4 or 5 years, and it's been quite a successful venture on the part of the council. It's an idea that goes back to the late 80s from the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council that was taken up by from the North Ethnic Communities Council, was taken up by the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council. So it was a concept that has got quite a bit of history. I think what I'd like to focus on in the short time that I've got is in relation to the findings of the report. And basically the report found that there was an overwhelming satisfaction with the Intercultural Centre and the activities and the services that it does provide. Mind you, having said that, I know that in the first few years of the Intercultural Centre, it was basically a very buzzing place. It was incredible the amount of activity that was occurring there. So it really proved it was really a proof of concept in relation to the Intercultural Centre. Over the last few years, it's sort of the activity has sort of wobbled a bit, and part of the reason for that is that because the building is essentially it's not a suitable building. The VCAT building, originally when the Intercultural Centre went in there, they had access to the whole building. Then VCAT came back and took over many of the rooms in the building. As a result of that, I call it not so much an intercultural centre, it almost looks like a detention centre in the sense that it's got guards and police at the front of it, often sometimes for some of those VCAT decisions. So that's actually shied away a few people from actually being involved and coming to the centre. And it's also stifled participation at the centre. And this goes on to the next finding in relation to the report, is about finding a better and new place for the Intercultural Centre. As I said, this idea goes back to the 80s. It's not something that we just invented the other day and thinking that it should happen. It's got a long history, and it's also in recognition of the very broad diversity that we have here in our city. And it's a way of also acknowledging that broad diversity and ensuring that diversity fully participates in the life of the city. Our council plan talks about that our diversity is our asset. Well, we need to give an asset to that diversity. And finally, the recommendations talk about the next stage of work, which is actually identifying a place, identifying an appropriate building for the future of the Intercultural Centre.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, thank you. I have a particular attachment to the Intercultural Centre because I think I actually organised possibly one of the very first events that was ever held there, which was a village games night. One of the reasons for the establishment of the Intercultural Centre was to provide an alternative to people who might otherwise be using poker machines. And one of the ideas for an alternative was to actually invite people to come and play games. And it's hard to describe the look of joy on the face of elderly Italian and Greek citizens when they were playing Jenga for the first time in their lives and the wooden blocks went flying around the room. And it's just a reminder, actually, that there are many ways to bring people together, and that a game like Jenga, which nobody has to have any language to use, in which you can truly join in at any age, can be a fabulous thing to congregate around. I think it is true that the Intercultural Centre perhaps hasn't lived up to its potential, and I think that we see an enormous future for the possibility of a centre. I don't think it's something we should rush into, because I think it's really important that we get it right and that we think about a new home for the Intercultural Centre in the context of the development of other areas in Preston, and that there are some really things that are absolutely key to that, and one is the sort of central location where people will want to come and want to congregate. So I think we have a number of conversations that are happening in council around the future of the Preston precinct, around the future of the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre, that will actually provide a really fertile space to have this conversation and to develop something even more magnificent than it is now. And I still think that it is actually a really great place, and I've been to many events there, and I think that the people who have participated have done so very joyfully, actually, and really appreciated the space that is on offer. But I think it's also true that there's lots of people in our community who still don't know where it is. It is also, I think, worth noting that it's the home of the Darebin Communities Council, and that I think in any redevelopment there is the possibility for us to really broaden the definition of intercultural and extend it beyond thinking about different ethnicities towards all kinds of cultural experiences and cultural groups and journeys that we're on as a community.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'd like to support the recommendation. I was having a look at how easy it is to find information about the Intercultural Centre before, and it's quite challenging, and I understand that there's reasons for that. But what I really like about the idea of this report is that this really expands it out. And I think that we should really highlight interculturalism in our community. I think it's one of the most important and valuable things that we have in Darebin. But I thought it was really interesting. I just wanted to highlight that the report talked about how currently religious activities can't be held at the centre because it's not seen as interfaith in nature. And I really like the idea of expanding it out. And I appreciate that the report says it's an observed principle for the intercultural program to want to promote and encourage interculturalism whilst being unable to acknowledge individual cultural expression or traditions. So I really appreciate that's in the report, that we're going to expand, look for a better spot and expand the idea of being intercultural wider to ethnicity, cultural practice, religion, sexuality, education, health, socioeconomic background, age, disability, environment, etc. And I think that I agree with Councillor Rennie. I think this needs to be done carefully, but I think it could be a real highlight of us that you've done right.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie.
I absolutely agree that we should be opening up this space, and I mean that in both the definitions that are currently being used in the physical spaces. A couple of the things mentioned in the report is that at the moment there is sometimes an active process of not telling people about events, not letting people use the spaces, simply because the spaces are already at capacity. And to me that is really disappointing. That it's such a shame that there's people who want to use the spaces, who want to get that value, who just can't. So I think we need to have a short-term and sort of longer-term view, and perhaps in the short term some of these things, like as Councillor Newton mentioned, around expanding those definitions, allowing events that celebrate a single culture without necessarily having to be all cultures, taking away the limitations about religion, because for a lot of people the issues of religion and culture are so intertwined that they can't be separated. Opening up the spaces, perhaps if we while we look for a home, we could use other areas as overflow spaces, whether that be somewhere here or at the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre or Preston Library. I think it would be really great to find a new home that is in Preston. I was going to say definitely north of Bell Street. I think the only exception would be the very corner. The suggestion of the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre is certainly one that is interesting. It is the idea about having the Arts and Entertainment Centre as a cultural hub came up at the Arts Hack a couple of months ago, when there were some people there who had a vision of creating a space, and this would require, significant renovations, but to not just have the Darebin Intercultural Centre, but to have the leading intercultural centre that would be for all of Victoria. And I think if Darebin could be that place, that would be such an honour, and it would be such a great place to have it here in Preston, where we're so proud of the multicultural community.
Thank you, Councillor Mead. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Greco, Rennie, Newton and Amir. Just a few words. We have an intangible asset here in our municipality. That intangible asset is our multicultural community. It's our strength. I'm all about facts and figures, you know me. We here in Darebin have a community that has 148 different languages, 37 different religions, 6,000 international students. We also have a tangible asset in Darebin. It's the Intercultural Centre. We need to undertake an extensive analysis to make sure that our intangible asset equals our tangible asset. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I'll make it brief. I think Councillor Greco was a bit modest in his comments earlier, because just going to how this whole thing came about, whilst it was an initiative of the former Northcote Ethnic Communities Council and then the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, it would not have seen the light in previous terms had Councillor Greco not pushed so hard to see it happen and to make it a commitment of the 2008 to 2012 term of council, and it certainly was. But the connection that Councillor Rennie made to the alternative to a gambling site, I think provides probably a pretty good cue as to when we are having our conversations with the state government about gaming and pokies, is that this is the sort of community infrastructure which is appropriate and applicable anywhere, and in fact is one of the most effective, as we understand, to give people viable, safe alternatives, places to go, to feel safe and to recreate and connect. The other thing, though, I should just mention is that in relation to this, the current particular site, it does do something which I think any future site needs to do, which is be incredibly accessible and incredibly appropriate to a range of people. And this site's not perfect, obviously, but the future of any intercultural centre needs to speak to that well-rounded notion of accessibility and inclusion. And when this was cast, we actually hadn't gone very far on our journey of LGBTI inclusion. We hadn't gone anywhere near as far as a city in terms of thinking about people who may be wishing to connect and engage in different types of diversity. And interculturalism is a pretty profound concept because it exists here in Darebin, but it's not as well shared. So anything we do, I think, just like the current Intercultural Centre does draw people from outside, should also be a beacon for other places too. And that would be a great vision for us to have.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Williams.
Well, everybody else has spoken, I'll be there too. The Intercultural Centre does hold a very special place for me. I've gone to many events there. Two that I can think of the top of my head would be the Pearls of Wisdom, which was an Indigenous night of women just talking about their history and their family background and where they come from and their history. The other one was handing out certificates to refugees who never spoke a word of English when they came to Australia. And here I was handing out certificates at year levels of year 12 and that they had passed. And it was so rewarding to see their faces. Of course, there's been hundreds and hundreds of events that involve so many different cultures, people, nationalities, ages. And it has been a very unique place. And it holds a very special place to not only this council but previous councils. I think it's important that we do find a place that still holds that special place. Obviously the connection, easy access, particularly for public transport, somewhere where they're not going to feel vulnerable. Obviously it's over the years it's been cut down in size due to VCAT coming in and wanting some of the rooms. We've looked at other places like the Preston Girls School, and it just hasn't been right, hasn't been fitting, or it just hasn't, just wrong time. I hope we do really investigate something and we do really find something that's special, because I don't want it to chop and change and move and move and move again. Hopefully the next place, the next destination that we find will be something that's permanent and that we can absolutely, from what my previous councillor said, Councillor Rennie, that it will grow, because I think that it has huge potential, absolutely huge. So,
Thank
all
you.
for it.
Everyone's now spoken, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Next item is 8.5, amendment to the 2017-18 fees and charges schedule. Moved by Councillor Rennie and seconded by Councillor Mee. Councillor Rennie.
This one will be very quick. It's procedural in essence, and that is that the 2017-18 fees and charges schedule was prepared as part of the budget for 2017-18. It's subsequently been identified that there are a couple of minor errors or omissions, and this is simply a recommendation that would have us correct those errors and omissions in relation to some fees in the health promotion area. So they're not significant changes, but obviously if we identify an error, it's important that we set that straight, and it's a good principle.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Mee.
Nothing further.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 8.6, rescheduling planning committee meeting for November 2017. Moved by Councillor Rennie, seconded by Councillor Mee. Councillor Rennie.
Once again, a quick one. The current planning committee that we have scheduled for November is scheduled on the eve of Melbourne Cup Day. This is obviously a day between a weekend and a public holiday. We know from past experience that it's not a day when meetings tend to work very well. A lot of councillors, a lot of staff, and a lot of community members, a lot of people in the development community, basically a lot of Australians take a holiday and they don't want to be here at 7 o'clock on the Monday night. So we're proposing to move that meeting forward by 1 week. Fortunately, October is a month with 5 Mondays, which means that the 5th Monday of this month is actually a really good time to hold that planning meeting. And for that reason, suggest that we all pass this motion so that that planning meeting comes forward. There'll be a very minor cost involved in re-advertising the date of the planning meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Mee.
Just to add that I'm sure people who have properties that are affected by the planning meeting will be happy to see decisions being made a week earlier, and hopefully then we can have as much community participation as possible, more so than on Cup Eve.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 9, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There is none. Item 10, notices of motion. There are none. Item 11, reports of standing committees. There are none. Item 12, records of assemblies of councillors. 12.1, assemblies of councillors held. Moved by Councillor Greco and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 13, reports by Mayor and councillors. Moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor Rennie. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 14, consideration of reports considered confidential. There are no reports. And that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming along.
Welcome back. Thank you.